What color is your hair? Brown, black, blonde, red? What about your eyes? Brown, black, hazel, green, blue, gray? These are your traits which are encoded by your DNA. Do you share traits with your biological parents or your siblings? You inherit half of your DNA or chromosomes from your biological mom and half from your biological dad. These chromosomes contain genes with the instructions for the traits that you have. Inheritance is the process by which the traits of individuals are passed to their offspring. If we review the genetic material in a cell, there's DNA, genes, and chromosomes. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, which consists of nucleotides strung together to yield the molecule. Genes are particular sequences of DNA on chromosomes that usually encode proteins. Remember that chromosomes are long strands of DNA that contain certain genes in certain orders. These chromosomes are passed from cell to cell during cell division and from organism to organism during reproduction. Inheritance then involves passing genes from parents to offspring. Most human cells aside from the gametes have 2 of each type of chromosome. This makes them diploid. Di as a prefix means 2, which refers to 2 of each type of chromosome. For example, you have 2 of chromosome number 1, 2 of chromosome number 2, etc. Human cells have 23 pairs of chromosomes. These are referred to as homologous pairs or homologs. You get 1 member of each pair from your biological mom and 1 member of each pair from your biological dad. Chromosomes 1 through 22 are autosome pairs. These are the same in males and females. We also have an additional pair of sex chromosomes, which are different in males and females. Females have 2 X chromosomes, while males have an X and a Y. Since we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, this means that we have 46 chromosomes total. There are 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes in most human cells. The chromosomes viewed within the nucleus at the top were removed from a cell during mitosis and spread out on a slide, as seen on the right, and arranged according to length, as seen on the left. These are arranged in length from largest to smallest. The chromosomes were dyed with fluorescent stains to visualize the different chromosomes. This arrangement is called a karyotype. Chromosomes 1 through 22 are the autosomes, and the 2 X chromosomes are the sex chromosomes, so these chromosomes came from a female. A locus refers to a gene's physical location on a chromosome. Each chromosome in a homologous pair has the same genes located at the same loci. However, the gene sequences are not always identical. 2 homologs may have different nucleotide sequences of a gene called alleles. Alleles are different forms of the same gene. For example, if you look at the gene for eye color, different alleles include brown, blue, gray, hazel, and green. These different alleles arise from mutations, which lead to different traits or genetic disorders. If a mutation occurs in a sperm or an egg cell, it may be passed from parents to offspring. This is a pair of homologous chromosomes. Envision that the blue one came from dad and the red one came from mom. These homologous chromosomes have the same genes in the same order. However, the genes might be slight variations or alleles of one another, as depicted here by uppercase and lowercase letters. This is not surprising because you inherit 1 member of each pair from each parent. Therefore, you wouldn't expect all of the genes to be identical since your parents are not identical. Gregor Mendel founded the field of genetics. He was an Austrian monk who performed experiments in the mid-1800s before DNA had ever been discovered. Imagine that, founding a field based on a molecule that you don't even know exists. What Mendel did was he crossed pea plants to study transmission of traits from parents to offspring. He chose to work with pea plants because they're easy to breed and they produce large numbers of offspring quickly. Therefore, he could obtain a lot of data very quickly. Gregor Mendel, who is considered the forefather of genetics, experimented with thousands of garden pea plants to uncover the fundamentals of genetics. Pea plants contain both male and female gametes, so they undergo what's called self-fertilization or self-pollination. What this means is that one plant can produce its own offspring. Mendel started with true breeding plants. These are plants that always yield offspring with identical traits as themselves when they self-fertilize. He also took pollen from one plant and put it on another plant. This is referred to as cross-fertilization or cross-pollination. So what Mendel did was he mated two plants with either the same or different traits to see what types of offspring they produced. Let's take a look at one of Mendel's crosses. He cross-fertilized true-breeding parental pea plants with different flower colors. He started with parents that were true-breeding for violet flowers and crossed them with pea plants that were true-breeding for white flowers. This generated the first filial generation, or the F1 generation, which had all violet flowers. Filials derived from the Latin word for child. These are surprising results because you would expect that some white flowers would appear in the offspring. So what happened to the white flower color? It seemed to actually disappear in the offspring. What Mendel wanted to know is if the white flower color was somehow hidden in the violet flower plants. Therefore, he allowed the F1 plants to self-fertilize to figure this out. When the F1 plants self-fertilized, 3/4 of the next generation of F2 plants had purple flowers and 1/4 had white flowers. This equates to a 3-to-1 ratio of purple to white flowers. If we take a look at the self-fertilization, we see that the F1 plants with violet flowers were able to generate offspring that had 3/4 violet flowers and 1/4 white flowers. So what we see is in the second filial generation, the white flower color reappears. The violet flower color is the dominant trait, while the white flower color is the recessive trait. We'll talk more about this coming up. In one of his experiments on inheritance patterns, Mendel crossed plants that were true breeding for violet flower color with plants that were true breeding for white flower color. This was the P1 generation. The resulting hybrid plants in the F1 generation all had violet flowers. In the F2 generation, approximately 3/4 of the plants had violet flowers and 1/4 had white flowers. The white flower color reappeared in the F2 generation when the F1 violet plants self-fertilized. Therefore, the white color had been hidden in these F1 violet flower plants. This is due to dominant versus recessive genes. Each trait is determined by a pair of genes on homologous chromosomes, and each organism has 2 alleles for each gene, in this case, violet or white flower color. When 2 different alleles are present in an organism, one allele is dominant and the other is recessive. A dominant allele corresponds with a trait that's visible when 1 or 2 copies of the allele are present. The individual can either be heterozygous or homozygous dominant for this allele. We'll discuss these terms more on the next slide. A dominant allele or trait can mask a recessive allele or trait. The example of flower color is that the violet flower color in the F1 generation of plants masked the white flower color. A recessive allele corresponds with a trait that's only visible when 2 copies of the allele are present. Therefore, the individual must be homozygous recessive for this allele. A recessive allele or trait can be masked by the dominant allele or trait. In this case, the white flower color in the F1 generation of plants was masked by the violet color. Since cells have 2 of each type of chromosome, they have 2 copies of each gene. Therefore, we can state that for each pair of genes, an individual can either be homozygous or heterozygous. Homozygous refers to both homologous chromosomes having the same gene allele at a locus, while heterozygous refers to both homologous chromosomes having different alleles at a locus. This pair of homologous chromosomes is heterozygous for all 3 genes, since the blue chromosome has dominant alleles indicated with a capital letter, while the red chromosome has recessive alleles indicated by lowercase letters. The genotype refers to the combination of alleles carried by an organism. If we consider flower color, the genotypes include uppercase P, uppercase P, uppercase P, lowercase p, or lowercase p, lowercase p. This refers to homozygous dominant, heterozygous, or homozygous recessive. Homozygous means the same, and homozygous dominant refers to having two dominant alleles. Heterozygous refers to being different. Therefore, in this case, this refers to having one dominant and one recessive allele for flower color. Homozygous recessive refers to having two recessive alleles. The genotype leads to the phenotype. The phenotype is the organism's traits or outward physical appearance. In this case, either violet or white flowers. Once again, it's the combination of alleles that an organism carries that determines the phenotypes that they display. When it comes to phenotypes, the wild-type phenotype is the most common phenotype. Examples include violet flowers in peas and brown eyes in humans. The mutant phenotype is the less common phenotype. This is a variation of the wild-type trait, which resulted from a variation in the gene that encoded for the protein leading to the trait. Examples include white flowers in peas and blue eyes in humans.